Hello and welcome with a lot of enthusiasm today for our CM Convo show. We are diving into a thought-provoking proposal Dan Miller, our guest of today, suggested in early 2024, roughly 1 year and 2 months ago, when he was suggesting hitting the brakes on the development of GenAI would be useful. Take a break, take a gap year, and do not speed everybody and the human beings to learn faster than they could digest. That was my first take. Then we started discussing the topic, and now we're after roughly 1 year ago, we ask ourselves, how are things developing right now? And what would that break have helped? Would it have helped? In his article, he raised some question, is GenAI truly generating new content or just recycling what's already out there? Can smaller innovators survive the relentless race dominated by the tech giants? And we wanted to stir up the pot again with all those developments which have taken place during the last month, especially what I was wondering about, his take on the DeepSeek moment. What were his reflections on that one? We also explore how frameworks like the AOEI Act or the White House directive could have guided the future of AI developments, or are simple ignore or merely thought to be obsolete to a certain extent. Stay tuned as we unpack these pressing questions and more, inspired by Dan's article and furthermore thoughts. But to come to the point now, who is Dan Miller? The friendly face you see there with that lovely green plant. With the lovely green plant, I was just about to describe. And I would like to make my life a bit more easy and let Dan introduce himself. So welcome, Dan. We're grateful that you had made it, and it is coming up a fantastic hour.
Thank you. I'm glad you're so optimistic. So Marshall's picture showed up in the intro, so I just want to give a tribute. I miss him very much, and last time I was on, it was the four of us, and let's not forget that.
But then, it's one of the reasons why we are very reluctant to remove his image.
Yeah, no, good.
He is with us.
Yeah.
Still watching from somewhere upstairs, you could say so.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, he did the ultimate transition. I guess the segue is, in the time. So who is Dan Miller? I am a retired analyst, but there's no such thing as retiring from analyzing stuff. The long story is I've been a technology analyst. My first job was in 1980 at a place called Link Resources that was bought by IDC, but my role was to look at the impact of new technologies on hidebound industries. So I ran something called the New Electronic Media Program. We had 40 clients. We were headquartered in New York, so those 40 clients were the TV networks, all the large advertising agencies. We had the movie houses, Fox, Warner, Universal, all the cable companies, and we were trying to sort out what the impact of satellites and online distribution of information and stuff was going to be. But we can fast forward from that. I founded a company called Opus Research back in 1986 and had no idea what I was going to be covering, but it was more about telecommunications technologies combined with intelligence, computers. We were just starting to get electronic switching systems in the public network. Stuff was going digital, and it was the same sort of stuff. What is the impact on our lives as, you know, a continuous information environment evolved? And I was always thinking, you know, how does it benefit people, individuals, end users, whatever we want to call them? But therefore, we had to have clients that were, you know, the major telcos, broadcasters, computer makers, whatever. And, you know, just thinking about what then, around the turn of the century, I was calling conversational technologies. So these are the technologies that improve conversations, person to person, person to machine, and then the machine to machine stuff that has to go on in the background to get rid of latencies, to understand stuff, to come up with the correct response, that sort of thing. And that's why I would argue that most of these things became precursor technologies to what we're now calling GenAI and you know, bots and that sort of stuff. So speech recognition, the development on natural language processing, the kind of analytics that has to go on in real time. I've been giving a lot of thought to that for a very long time. And it's kind of interesting that I decided to retire right when it came to fruition of sorts. And, you know, it's sort of given me some distance. You know, you brought up that article I wrote a year and 2 ago saying, hey, literally, I think I was saying LLMs and GenAI need a gap year. It just, and I wasn't advocating stepping on the brakes. You know, at the time there were the techno optimists who were saying, you know, gung ho, let's have AGI. It's going to improve the world. We're 3 years from from AI having consciousness and you know, operating on itself. And the other people said no, literally said pump the brakes, put these government imposed guardrails on development. And you know, I was thinking if they went that latter route, the people that listened and just sort of stopped developing stuff would fall behind the people that were going gung-ho and saying, let's go ahead and, you know, full stead here. So all I was saying is, you know, take sort of a step back as individuals, either end users or implementers, and give it a gap year. It being GenAI, it's going to go out in the world. It's going to, you know, continue to sort of be trained, develop larger language models, and more domain-specific stuff would go on. And, you know, okay, here we are a year later. What exactly happened? And I think it's gratifying to see, you know, the mega companies are still going ahead, plowing a lot of money and building data farms and you know, coming out with new renditions every week or whatever. And there's that constant horse race of, you know, is Claude 4 point whatever better than ChatGPT or GPT 4 point whatever, and when is GPT 5 coming out? That we should have stepped back and said, oh, let them go ahead and do this. What does it mean to me? And that's what's been interesting to see is that we have new tools, we have new domain-specific things going on. We have new architectures that say, hey, I'm into, you know, you can bring whatever LLM you want, and you know, let's make it a personal tool. You know, I guess what inspired me 2 days ago was getting familiar with this idea of vibe coding. Is that something that in Germany or that you've seen, Thomas, that that there are non-technical people in marketing, people sort of designing services that would benefit from deploying an LLM to write code, and they just describe what they want, and depending on which model they chose or something like that, they do get serviceable code that does the thing that they ask, and they're just sort of vibing. They're not writing, spending the 24/7 time putting the hard work. But anyway, that's the thing that
to answer your question, Dan, to me, this is just a shorter version of the clunky word citizen developer.
Yeah.
So my derogative take is marketers needed another word. Now there is one. And I'm glad it's not hyper.
Oh, they didn't add hyper. Yeah, I like that.
Hyper coding.
It's the hyper vibers.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Yeah, and I've heard it in both contexts but I think one of the important things that we're learning in this gap year is kind of to each his own. I mean, there'll be alpha programmers who can use coding tools to do the some of the grunt work they don't want to do, or if they, I've heard, the description that, I wrote a bunch of code myself. I gave it to Claude to debug, and it came up with these suggestions, which I took over to ChatGPT and said, run this the way it's described here. And it just becomes a set of tools. That coder is still excellent and a coder, and he or she is learning, how to take best advantage of the resources that are out there. And there's parallels to that in how each of us, like, I think I'm a good writer. I'm not a technologist of sorts, but since 1980, like I said, I've been called upon to sort of describe, what's TCP/IP, or actually one of my favorite assignments is this guy that started the Weather Channel back in '82. He's working for a company called Landmark Communications, and he was trying to convince his boss to invest in a satellite, a transponder, a radio transponder on an array in a satellite, and he said, what's the likelihood that this is going to fail? and I'd have to go research something I didn't know anything about, call the satellite launcher, describe the situation, find the answer. And that's the sort of thing that today, and then I write something really clear, here's what so-and-so told me, it depends on how far it is from the power source, and what the weather's like on the day of the launch. Here's the sources of risk. Here's what could happen, and I could write clearly about that. That's always been my gift. But I think in this day and age, I would have compiled, or I would have started with a question to Perplexity or to Claude. Just ask it and see, and then view it with skepticism, and then write what I would write, and still do the grunt work, but now we have this this assistant, living up to this idea of an automated intelligent assistant, but how I would use it would be different from how you would use it, I would think.
How trustworthy is this assistant?
Everything's an 80-20 rule, so 20% of the time, it'll state with great confidence something that's absolutely incorrect. And then that's why it's always going to be needed, just with a bullshit detector, and say, no, that's not right. I'm going to go, ask somebody else.
Because I recently asked a system, was Gemini in this case, for a case study that has following criteria, or several case studies. So industry, problem solved, KPIs, and change in KPIs. So, it gave me a couple, even with sources. The sources have been absolute BS.
Yeah.
And the output, the textual output that it gave me was absolutely convincing.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you really need to trust but verify, right?
But yes, exactly. And regard it with total skepticism. And that's why, okay, in the customer care setting, the idea that you could go directly to, well, we're living in this. It has to do with your expectations. Like if you go on a company website and you want assistance, the quickest thing you're going to get is a bot there saying, how to help you. And there's 80-20, 80% of them still strikes me are hard coded and can say, here are the 5 things I can do. And then, maybe not be capable of transferring you to a live person when something's out of bounds. But for 20% that are trying to incorporate GenAI and, inform it with the company's full knowledge base across departments and stuff like that, it's getting very interesting of what it can accomplish. But we know, and my Opus research is in the middle of doing an upcoming IntelliView on IA for customer service. So I still have access to sort of look at the state of the market and stuff like that. And the challenge right now is how we transition from that hard-coded stuff over to something that's more flexible, what the balance is going to be when I shouldn't say more flexible, but something that embraces an LLM of choice and GenAI that is relevant to a topic and that sort of thing. And then, to Ralph's point is how do you stay within the bounds of what the company says or the legal department says it can answer? So, we're going to live in this hybrid world where it's kind of hit or miss whether you're actually, being handled by that wonderful GenAI that may be an unreliable narrator or provider of information.
I'm just curious because you mentioned earlier that there are some stuff and roles where you see the AI as an intelligent assistant. You gave some examples. I wonder if for some of the spare time you have and you prefer to do meals preparation in this, did you ask for some recipes, your AI favorite tool?
Yeah.
And was it helpful, or would you say, I'm as distrusting as with an analytic research I did ask?
Oh, absolutely. And I consider myself a really good cook. So here's what it gets down to. And it is a classic call bullshit on the bot. I will, the classic thing is you should be able to take a picture of the stuff in your refrigerator and have it suggest what you can do with it. And I've never done that. But what I have done is if I'm gonna make, we bought an air fryer, which is basically just a fast convection oven. And I have some things I make, usually some form of chicken, because we won't put fish in the air fryer. But the things that get confusing are like, whoa, how long should I cook this in the air fryer? And here's what I want to make. It's breaded chicken cutlets, and you can ask ChatGPT, you can ask Claude, and each comes up with a range. And then I have my own personal experience of like, oh, I had already tried this and that seems wrong. But you can get even you can get little details like what spice should go in the breading. If I want it to be sort of Mediterranean as opposed to Cajun, and it knows this stuff. It'll list coriander and sumac and stuff, and Middle Eastern.
But it also sometimes suggests to use glue to fix the salami to the pizza. Yeah, but back to the roots. There is a GenAI or a bot in this case an appropriate tool to increase customer experience.
Yeah, and
or
so here's where we're
even.
at. I think that the qualitatively the best installations we've seen have a limited set of tasks that they can do. They're real. I think they're good at. I'm going to put you on mute for 1 second. Clear my throat. Sorry about that. They've demonstrated to do well in triage. I mean, it's almost like son of IVR. IVR becomes IVA. Why are you calling? Who are you? Blah blah blah. You can. I would say engineer a prompt, but one of my firm beliefs is prompt engineering is not a thing. we're kind of learning that, because remember when ChatGPT, the covers came off of ChatGPT, interacting with LLMs became conversational. People that had been designing conversational models and stuff like that for particular applications we're having heart attacks and saying, my life's so unnecessary now. Look at what it can do that I had spent all this time doing. And they were told, there's a future for you as a prompt engineer. And there's studios for designing prompts and stuff like that. Meanwhile, like the general population is plowed ahead and learn, I don't know if it's prompt engineering. I can just go there and type what I'm asking and I'll refine it. It's conversational. I will get through some iterative process to telling the LLM what I want and getting a generated response. And people are learning it with describing pictures that they'd like to see and the style they'd like to see. And so individuals are learning what they're good at doing with these sorts of things. The implications for customer care are, hey, a virtual agent should be able to answer the phone, so there's voice AI there, or be on the chat window on the website, and you should be able to describe what you want in your own words. And while speech rec people have said, oh, we've been promising, just tell me what you want for 15 years now, you can actually do it now. And it's not engineering a prompt. It's not conforming to, some list of intents that had to be, mapped and programmed and chunked and all that. People just say what they want. So triage, just recognizing who the person is, what their intent is, and then that's getting to be sort of basic. Another one I would argue is just enhanced search, that you should be able to get on a GenAI fueled resource operated by a company that can do search of, you just say what you're looking for. And if it's something that's in a product catalog and pricing and stuff like that, just be able to answer that. If it's a how-to sort of thing, whether it's Home Depot building, and unboxing and building and doing something, we'll see more and more of that. And that can be done pretty accurately. And we're getting pretty close to step by step. To your question about cooking or whatever is there's no reason why these things can't accurately render the steps it takes to get from point A to point B and certainly would be better than those weird stick figures that you get from IKEA or something like that. So, or at least on a par.
So helpful in general.
Yeah, it is helpful.
I mean, we started with trust but verify. So this means the helpfulness ends at some level. You said 80-20. Yeah? So, which Pareto rules apply pretty much everywhere. So, but then if I'm using a technology, I'm using that in order to get beyond this 80-20 and have something that is working at pretty much all the time.
Right.
For all questions that come up. So do you see that coming at all?
I don't. Well, yeah. I mean, I think there's levels of reliability. When you think about the solution stack of technologies it takes to fulfill on this sort of thing. And where I'm coming from, telecommunications is fundamental. That layer, people wanted 5 nines. 5 nines literally meant that if you're operating a network, it can be down for 20 minutes in a year or something like, that's the 24/7 reliability for the rock bottom technology there. Right above that, in my cosmology, there were word error rates for speech recognition, and those had to be well above 90%. And it's still a bugaboo with these transcription companies that are doing transcription. They're getting more and more accurate, but if you're at 90 and there's 10 words and one of them is, like it's an address you're trying to go to, and the one word it doesn't get is the name of the street. It's as if it wasn't accurate at all, and it's totally useless. So, there's been a lot of money invested in building transcription services that recognize proper names, recognize names of medication. There'll be domain-specific ways that they tune things to be more accurate. And I think that, so if Pareto, 80-20 is like, I think I'm saying it's where we're at right now. I'm probably pessimistic there. I think we might be at 90-10. I think for specific implementations for, I mentioned, sort of the doctor's office or something like that, where, it's important to get the name of the medication and the dosage and stuff like that. They're getting fine-tuned to where they'll be in a 95, 96, 97%. But it's a product of investment and tuning and that sort of stuff. But my major point is we will always need humans to double check stuff. I think that's really important to know, because there's a million ways these things can go sideways, and you want to detect that and intervene. But I have a number of questions or things that I'm monitoring. For instance, I'm trying not to mention, I mentioned Home Depot. I'm trying not to mention brands or solution providers by design here. But I am a longtime customer of United Airlines, and I'm increasingly using, by their design, using their mobile app, their web resource to book, to be prompted where to go and what airport and all that sort of stuff. And I find it generally helpful, but I don't understand why I can't log on and say, hey, I'm going to New York next Thursday, book the flight for me. Instead, they have my payment information, they have my status, they have a whole list of flights, they have my history, which ones I've done in the past. why haven't, they made that sort of a interactive conversational interaction rather than a form filling thing? And I or a step-by-step sort of thing, all of which they understand because they do it in some context, but they haven't made it, an assistant, a conversational assistant moving towards, an actual agent, carrying out this stuff.
May that be because that would render the app useless? I say that because if you can do that fully conversationally, you don't need an extra app. You can do that via, Signal, to mention one.
Yeah.
That became infamous recently.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Because, if it's a conversation, you can do wherever. And
yeah.
Question
This
is
is almost like the Apple dilemma. That it's another company whose phone-based, contact center-based resource is tremendous. And if something goes south on your computer, you have a million ways to summon support and kind of describe it, and so it does the triage. It decides what it might point you to mark. It has this whole body of knowledge of like solutions and articles, but it could also toggle you over to a live person to walk you through stuff, and there's like this myth, this idea that there's something coming up called Apple Intelligence, which is going to make Siri into the thing that the resource that you turn to do all this on your behalf, which, as you point out, would render, having that weird interface with like a bajillion icons on several home screens useless. And I would argue to you, Thomas, that would be an improvement, getting rid of individual apps.
I agree. I totally agree. So at least from a user perspective, from a company perspective, probably not so, because they don't have control about the data flow anymore.
Well, and that might be their dilemma. They're on the horns of the dilemma that they're trying to define a space where they still do have control over the data flow. It's just that they don't. It wouldn't be through the app store. It'll probably move towards the wallet and stuff, how you interact with your, literally with your phone, with some resource in your phone, but they'll still have a lot of data.
Yeah, I was actually more at United than Apple at this with their comment.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, that has to be the tug of war, doesn't it? There's ways to solve it where we just take control of our own data, but that's like a discussion. That's discussion.
Next time. So booked already.
On the customer experience end, have you seen some progress? You made the remark on that app, and that sounded more or less there's a lot of room for improvement still. So you have been in February the last time with a vendor together and reflecting what it is probably going good in this CX way. What have you observed in that year? Yeah.
I think in during a year when there's so many ways we've come to question whether the passage of time marks progress as opposed to sort of regression, I don't think that's what's taken place in the customer experience world. I honestly think that two things are going on. I think the quality of service that can be provided with the current contact center technology, where there is faster recognition of intent. There's better sort of flagging and sharing of what, what the, when things go sideways, that they can remediate more quickly. If you're looking at customer satisfaction, not as the product of a post-call survey or something like that, but as completion of task quickly. I think we're seeing improvement in all of that. I think what we're also witnessing is a lag, and I've written about this quite a bit, that the hype around the arrival of these new technologies and their ability to provide better service has far exceeded the abilities of these technologies to provide better service. So there's skepticism among customers, among end users, that is warranted, but it means that nobody really expects right now for these intelligent virtual agents to carry out stuff that we technologists know they can do pretty routinely. So you still have people, there's customers would try to contact a company, and like we were just saying, not all of them have the latest version of whatever VA to be able to fulfill. And then the ones that do, if they have sophisticated customers, they're still gonna say, hey, I want to talk to a live person. And that hasn't gone away yet. So there hasn't been the wide positive experience that would lead to confidence that this stuff works. And it's a two-way street. It's a conversation between people and the technology. And right now, I still think the technology is out ahead of what we're willing to give it credit for being able to do. Therefore, people aren't discovering that that these things are available to them to operate on their behalf. But in too many instances, they don't have the customer's best interest at heart anyway. We still regard the implementation of these technologies largely as automation, not improvement. So and so there's still the, hey, we're saving money by handling you in automated fashion, rather than, hey, we're improving the quality of your experience and we're saving money at the same time. So that hasn't quite happened yet.
Would you say that, looking at it from that angle, so we are improving and therefore we are having success, or we are doing better for you and therefore we are having success as well? Would you say that this is a precondition of, let's say, optimally, quote unquote, using technologies that are as powerful as GenAI or agents?
Yeah.
Or does it work the other way around as well?
Well, I'll hark back to what we were saying, and I don't remember whether it was our pre-show discussion or we've already said this, so forgive me if it's redundant, but part of the quality of getting older is I forget things pretty quickly.
Hang on, then you have new experiences more often.
Yes, every day is a new day. It is, like it or not, enterprises are finding that their employees are pretty sophisticated. They're using Claude or Perplexity or ChatGPT for their own purposes outside the office. And I was saying, this harks back to the days when, companies were saying, you would have your workstation at work and it was capable of doing only the limited things that as a matter of policy, you were able to do on that device. And in the meantime, you could go home and use it for your own purposes, for entertainment, for, getting information, all that sort of thing. So people outside of their relationship with the company they work for or the businesses they do business with were figuring out the value of this stuff for themselves. And I think that people are discovering that, hey, this is good for search, this is good for find out, even though it may lie quite a bit sometimes, there's stuff I can do with GenAI, with an LLM, through my phone, through my my tablet, whatever, and then they have that expectation to be able to do that in their work situation, and they have that expectation that the companies they do business with should be a better job of bringing that those sorts of technologies to work on their behalf. So it's a multi-year process to get balance between what people expect the businesses they do business with to be able to provide for them. And then this is where I feel very old, because I feel like Gen X, Gen Z, and millennial. There's a generational thing that the way I carry out commerce is oddly enough becoming conversational, but almost in the form of like a game. And
how so? Can you elaborate on this almost like a game?
I haven't done any research on this, so this is my own personal observation.
Yeah, of course, of course.
And
you're an unretiree, so you're perfectly entitled to have an own opinion that is not entirely research based.
Yeah, I see a lot of screen time. We all see this. If you walk down the street or you go to the park or whatever, there's kids from toddler to I can't tell how old people are anymore, but there's just a lot more stuff people are doing through their screens, and it sort of starts with gaming, because that's the way you spend your time. Game is very goal oriented, and people are gain satisfaction by figuring out how they get from point A to point B, or defeat their enemies, or cooperate with other. I mean, you learn, rather than eye contact and interpersonal communications, you learn your way of interacting with the world through a screen in the form of a game. And how you carry out commerce carries over many of those behaviors and rewarded behaviors, so that the interface so if your objective is, I want to find the least expensive flight to such and such, there's a certain amount of gamification that could go on, and then your expectation how you attain that is formed by how you interact with a screen and whatever resources behind that screen, and that's customer experience.
True, but now let's throw a wrench, because you as a customer, gamified or not, want to get the cheapest flight. Given some other constraints that there are. So like you want to arrive by then and start not earlier than perhaps. And well, then there may or may not be an airline preference, just to stick to the example. This is your objective. Now, the objective of the provider that you are working with, whoever this is on the background behind the screen, in all likelihood has a totally different objective, which puts into the equation what's in it for me. Means which of those two flights, one of them being slightly more expensive than the other one, is giving me more revenue?
Yeah.
Just as this as an example, which is again something that I can't really check, right? So I may have perhaps feel that I have a good experience, but ultimately I'm cheated on.
Yeah.
Because I get the more expensive flight, like, well, those agents at banks that sell me funds are basically doing the same. They recommend those that make more margin for them. So why should the system behind the screen do the same?
Well, that just seems like one of those, hey, I have a worthy adversary here.
Of course, we want to have a discussion. We want to have a discussion. and Ralph will tell you that I'm known for throwing wrenches and yanking chains.
Yeah, no,
That's my role here.
It's perfect. And so actually, this gets into a really, if you're asking like what the next area of interest, as the what's the German word, Ralph?
Unruheständler, unretired.
The Unruheständler that I am, I think, what we've observed in the past 3 years is something that like Opus laid out 12 years ago. It said, hey, there's going to be an evolution of the Siris and Alexas and Bixby's. Bixby wasn't back there then, but from an intelligent assistant to an intelligent advisor, meaning that gets more domain specific. And then the next step, and this is where we're having a bunch of problems, is it goes from advisor to agent to a personal agent. And as much as there's been discussion of agentic AI in the as the most fashionable presentation of GenAI at this point, there's some accuracy in that description, meaning that you'll have a task that you define and it gets broken into a subtask which your agent knows how to orchestrate, and it acts autonomously periodically to accomplish your goal. That's where you don't need to throw a wrench or pull a chain in there. It can go sideways pretty quickly because there have to be conditions around around having an automated thing be your agent. It's a legal term. Agency is a thing. You need to sort of say, okay, this is a thing operating on my behalf to accomplish these tasks, and it has to be explicit, and it has to be recognized by the company you're carrying out business with. And forgive me if anybody watching has heard this before, but there was this case where an individual subscribed to a service that was going to cancel subscriptions to streaming services that they had that were unnecessary or redundant or whatever. And the bot calls up and identifies itself as a bot and says, I'm here to cancel Dan's subscription. And the company's policy is that has to be done in person. So it hangs up the phone, but the command to the bot is, hey, go cancel this. So it calls again immediately. And it does that 250 times. So the agent, this automated agent behaves more like a denial of service attack at a certain point. It's just there's just a lot of things that there's specific agreements that need to be worked out so that bot to bot commerce, your bot talking to a company bot can be efficient, and that's where I think there's some really, really interesting development to be done.
true. Yeah.
I love that one. I'm a big fan of, as I am a human bargain hunter, I would like to have a trained bot to get me all the best of the bargains, such as a human being went for a Ford dealership or asked on a website for a good price for a Ranger F150. And I read that lately and I said, wow, yeah, that's an expensive car. And the customer, the potential customer, just asked for a better price. And the machine, the bot, the AI offered him that offering for $1, if that would be fine for him. And he said, yeah. And are you legally able to make that contract happen? So I'm not here in a fake environment. And he said, yes. And now he is owner of one of these nice little cars.
Yeah. That was a scandal, though. I mean, that was the do not trust these things. But it also led to a legal discussion. Can the bot legally bind that dealership to sell it? And the answer at that time, yes.
Yeah.
Which means that there was a lot of attention paid to not reproduce that particular kind of action ever again.
But the question there is, to me, why? Because, I mean, it happens, right? Things go sideways all the times, whether there is a human on the other side or a machine on the other side. Air Canada had the same, right? So the bot offered a discount that the company didn't want to honor. So how if Agent Thomas offers the same discount?
Yeah, exactly.
So the errors, why do we treat an error by the machine as a different thing than an error by a human?
Yeah,
it's the same freaking thing from a consequence point of view.
And I'm thinking it's human nature, or empirically, you can observe that people get more joy describing that this was done by a bot. Can you believe what this bot did? Would go around in a social network more than, hey, can you see how stupid us people are?
The German expression is Schadenfreude.
Schadenfreude, yes. That's a little different. That's when you get joy from somebody's misfortune, so Botenfreude would be something different. It's making fun of what a bot does.
Yeah.
New word. We are getting creative here.
Yeah. Hey, that's my goal. The first job I ever wanted to have, I wanted to be a headline writer, and and I wanted to make up words. So Botenfreude, you can have it.
Well, we always will put a credit to that one now.
Thank you. No, trademark. I don't think so.
Yeah. But is that the only reason that people love to make fun of mistakes done by the machine? Because I mean, we made fun of broken guitars as well, right? This was certainly isn't it like in general we make
like
fun of mishappenings that happen somewhere? But I mean, legally, assuming the bot, if a company puts a bot on their website that gives some responses, I would assume that this thing is empowered to do so, and the company is bound by whatever this thing does. And this thing might be me chatting on the other side. Where's the difference?
I think subconsciously we're all scared of becoming the subjects of our machine overlords. So we derive some pleasure when these things demonstrate that they're not infallible, because we think it pushes off that moment when these proponents of artificial general intelligence, unleash that thing. And, we have to keep enough healthy skepticism out there, or unhealthy skepticism. But, the trick is, let's identify where these resources benefit us, don't threaten us. Everything else is funny.
Yeah, but the benefiting there is again cui bono, right? So if I'm a maker of some solution, I of course address the ones with the funds, which are usually not the consumers.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So right.
So
So there's a whole...
which brings us back to the buying a flight example.
Yeah.
But there was also my starting question, as I always love Thomas when he gets his shiny eyes and sharing some experiences on positive reflections with his Apple tools and toys. I enjoyed very much the moment when all those tech giants had their, as I call it, the deep seek moment, when they just learned that somebody is trying to, in a certain way, outsmart them. What was your reflection on that?
I may have had my Thomas moment with that. I thought it was it serves you right moment. So, where government policy was saying China cannot have our latest chips. So let's cripple their efforts to develop stuff on a par with us. And it had the opposite effect that some of the brightest minds in the world, because I think we always do better when we cooperate, but we were saying, no, we're not going to cooperate here. So they went off and they said, okay, we have these crippled chips here. But we can write code and do stuff that outperforms what's running on the zippiest things out there. And guess what? It has implications, for my world, where I think this should benefit individuals, is that these lower power, it shows that you can write models that run on less than the most powerful GPUs out there, which means you can stuff out near the edge. There's more stuff you can do on your smartphone, that sort of thing. So it was more than a FU moment. It was kind of an introduction of new possibilities, which moved a vision forward of stuff going on at the edge.
Yeah.
So we can all agree upon that scarcity or limitations, probably constraints, encourage innovation. That's probably the key to it. So this policy was a good example for the difference between meant well and executed poorly.
Yeah, or it's just
the law of unintended consequences.
That's what it is, and go with it. The unintended consequences is an improvement over the intended one. So yes.
Yeah. Looking at the time.
Yeah, it goes fast.
Yeah, well, so we are. It's amazing how fast it goes. It's amazing how fast it goes.
Yes.
However, that brings us to our most important part of the discussion, which is our famous last words, in order to be able to terminate the session and not Dan. But I wonder, last year, well, a bit more than last year ago, you suggested taking a gap year. Now that you are in your own personal gap year, looking at technology from the outside as an unretiree, what would you suggest today? Instead of, well, maybe another gap year, but what would you say this year?
Is to take GenAI personally. I mean, I what has been, like I said, gratifying earlier in this, is that each one of us is sort of figuring out the best way we can use this stuff. And I had that, hey, it's better for search. It's good at it's okay at research. It may not be trustworthy, but we're all figuring out it's useful. And whether it's, I mean, you may not want like an 8th grader to have it write a routine term paper, but you may want that 8th grader to be able to, sort of learn to ask the right questions to get some answer and then question it. So what I'd really like to see us all sort of thinking how we use this to our own personal advantage, because that point you have about the asymmetry of life, that there are people with deeper pockets and more resources and whatever. Can we use these technologies to sort of fight that asymmetry and sort of empower our lives? And that's what it gets down to.
Perfect. Thanks heaps, Dan. Thanks heaps for your time, your wisdom.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me. I love talking with you guys.
And a lot of fun.
Same.
Yeah.
I mean, you founded Opus the year I graduated from high school, right? So there's a lot of wisdom in what you are saying. So it's not just cliche.
Hey, thanks for having me. And
thanks a lot. And well, thanks also to the silent audience. According to LinkedIn, there are still some people in here that we didn't scare away, who we didn't scare away. Thanks to whoever it is as well. And then tune in next week when we are diving into AI transformation and what are probably real game changers from a mid-market to enterprise point of view with our guest Karl-Heinz Land from German company Neuland AI. Okay,
say hi to Carl
see you then.
Land from me. Yeah.
Going backstage.
Okay, thanks.